Hello and welcome. It is early Friday morning, August 1st, 2025. Perhaps the sun is just beginning to touch the sky where you are. Or perhaps the day is already old. Or maybe the moon is your only companion in the quiet dark. Wherever you are, and whatever time it is, thank you for choosing to be here, in this space. Tonight, we're starting something new. For a long time, we've talked about the strange world of modern money, of billionaires and rockets and digital fortunes. But the human story of money, of survival and ambition, is as old as civilization itself. So we're going to leave the skyscrapers and the stock tickers behind. We are going to travel back in time. Each time we meet here, we will journey to a different corner of history, to ancient empires, forgotten trade routes, and pivotal moments of change, to follow the life of one person navigating the economy of their age. Our first story is about a simple merchant of rice, a man who believed in order, caught in a world that was falling apart. It's a story about choices, about the thin line between saving your community and saving yourself. So, if you enjoy these journeys into the past, please consider subscribing to the channel, and a simple like on the video lets me know that we should continue exploring these forgotten worlds together. It truly helps others who are looking for a quiet escape to find their way here. Now then, the world outside can wait. Find your quiet corner. Settle into your bed and let your pillow cradle your head. Pull up your blanket. There is nothing else you need to do now, but listen. Together, let's go back. He who does not economize will have to agonize. Confucius. Let's travel back, not just years or decades, but centuries. Back, through 2,400 years of dust and echoes, to a time when China was not one nation, but a patchwork of feuding kingdoms. The air itself feels different here. It's thick with the smoke of wood fires and the metallic scent of distant, simmering conflict. This is the Warring States period, around 400 BCE. The old Zhou dynasty, once a source of celestial order, is now just a shadow of its former self. In its place, 7 rival states, Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin, are locked in a relentless struggle for dominance. Power is not held by mandate from heaven anymore, but by the sharp point of a spear and the strength of a city wall. And in a world like this, the most powerful weapon is not bronze or iron, it is grain. An army with a full belly can march for another season. A kingdom with full granaries can withstand a siege. A populace without food will riot and tear down its own masters. Rice is not just food. It is power. It is strategy. It is survival itself. But before we meet our merchant, let's go back even further, just for a moment, into his memory. Imagine a small boy, no older than 7. His name is Wu Lian. He is hiding behind a large clay pot in his family's small hut, listening to his parents whisper. The whispers are thin and sharp, like the winter wind outside. It is the year of the great drought, and the famine has come with it. He watches his mother. Every evening she takes the small handful of rice they have for their meal, and before she cooks it, she performs a ritual. She carefully picks out 10 individual grains, no more, no less, and places them in a small, sealed pot she keeps hidden under a loose floorboard. One night, the boy, his stomach aching with hunger, asks her why. "Mother," he whispers, "why do you take food away when we have so little?" She looks at him, her face tired but her eyes clear. "Lian," she says softly, her voice just for him, "this is not food for today. This is the seed for tomorrow. To eat every grain today is to guarantee we will starve forever. To save a little, even when it hurts, that is the only way to have a tomorrow at all." He never forgot. The feeling of that hunger, and the quiet dignity of his mother's discipline became the twin pillars of his entire life. The memory of those 10 grains of rice, saved against the agony of the present, became the seed of his own philosophy. A seed that is about to be tested by the fires of war and the failures of men. Let us arrive now in Wu Lian's present. He is 38 years old, a man whose face holds the memory of that childhood hunger, but also the quiet satisfaction of a life built with care. He is no longer a starving boy. He is the respected owner of the Jing River Rice Depot, a modest but prosperous trading post nestled in a gentle curve of the river, in a small town that has, until now, remained blessedly unremarkable on the borderlands of the powerful state of Qi. You can almost smell the air here. It's a mix of damp earth from the riverbank, the sweet, dusty scent of raw rice from the storehouses, and the faint aroma of ink from the ledger room. This is Wu Lian's world. It is a world of order. His day begins before dawn. We can see him now, a solitary figure in the soft gray light, walking through his main storehouse. He is not a large man, but he moves with a farmer's deliberate strength. He runs his hand along the tightly woven hemp of a rice sack, feeling its weight. He plunges a hand deep into a barrel of grain, letting the kernels run through his fingers, checking for dampness, for pests, for the telltale signs of rot. His workers, who he pays on time, every time, without fail, say that Wu Lian can tell the origin of a single grain of rice just by its feel. It's a joke, but it's close to a grain of truth. After his inspection, he retreats to his office. It is a simple room, containing little more than a sturdy wooden desk, a few dozen bamboo scrolls, and an abacus whose wooden beads have been worn smooth by his constant calculations. This is his sanctuary. Here, he tracks the flow of grain, the debts owed, the payments made. The neat columns of characters he paints with his brush are not just numbers to him. They are a story of trust, of promises kept. Later in the morning, his apprentice arrives, a boy of 14 named Tao. Young Tao is bright, idealistic, and fascinated by the magic of the abacus. While Wu Lian sees the ledger as a record of the past, Tao sees it as a tool for predicting the future. He dreams of becoming a minister, of using numbers to bring order and prosperity to the entire kingdom. Wu Lian sees the boy's ambition and smiles. It is the kind of dream that can only exist in a time of peace. "Master Lian," Tao says, his eyes wide with a new thought. "If we could know exactly how much rain will fall next season, we could tell every farmer exactly how much seed to plant. There would never be a shortage again." Wu Lian looks up from his scroll. "A noble thought, Tao, but it is often easier to count the raindrops than it is to predict the greed of men." Their conversation is interrupted by the slow, shuffling footsteps of Elder Shou, a retired Confucian scholar who lives in the village. The elder often sits under the shade of a large willow tree by the riverbank, watching the water flow. He approaches Wu Lian not as a customer but as a friend. "The river is low this morning, Merchant Wu," Elder Shou says, his voice a dry rustle like autumn leaves. He squints at the water. "The currents from the north are weak." Wu Lian nods, his expression tightening. "I have noticed, Elder. My last 3 shipments from the upper provinces are late. The traders have not arrived. This is the first sign of trouble. A subtle shift in the rhythm of the world. The river, the lifeblood of their trade, is changing. The predictable patterns are breaking down. Rumors have been trickling in with the few travelers who pass through. Rumors of skirmishes between the warlords of Qi and Wei, of farmlands being conscripted for military use, of rising taxes in the capital." Wu Lian tries to push the anxiety aside. He has built his business on stability. He has enough grain in his storehouses to last for months. He has economized. He has saved. He has prepared. But then, a week later, the trouble arrives in a more official form. 2 soldiers, wearing the colors of the governor of Qi, ride into his depot. They are not here to trade. They unroll a bamboo scroll bearing the governor's official seal. One of the soldiers reads the edict aloud, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Due to the current military necessities, all registered grain merchants are now subject to a new imperial quota. Wu Lian listens, his hands clenched at his sides. The words are a drumbeat of doom. He is required to deliver 40% more rice to the state granaries than he did the previous year. 40%. It's an impossible number. The harvest was good, but not that good, and the final line of the edict makes the blood run cold in his veins. Failure to meet this quota will be considered an act of disloyalty to the state, and all assets will be subject to seizure. The soldier rolls up the scroll. He looks at Wu Lian, a flicker of something, pity, contempt, in his eyes. The governor expects his grain, he says, before turning his horse and riding away, leaving a cloud of dust and silence in his wake. Young Tao looks at his master, his idealistic face pale with shock. Elder Shou, who had watched from under his willow tree, simply closes his eyes. The calm is over. The agony has begun. Wu Lian stands alone in his depot, the scent of rice no longer a comfort, but the smell of a trap that has just sprung shut. His world of order has just been given an impossible equation to solve, and he knows, with a certainty that chills him to the bone, that there is no right answer. In the days that followed the soldier's visit, a heavy quiet descended upon the Jing River rice depot. It was the kind of quiet that was not peaceful but full of unspoken fear. Wu Lian retreated to his office, to the familiar comfort of his ledgers and his abacus. He spent hours with his brush and ink, the wooden beads of the abacus clicking like the frantic heart of an insect trapped in a jar. He was a man who believed in numbers, who believed that any problem could be solved if you could just map it out, account for all the variables, and find the elegant, balanced solution. But this was not a problem of numbers. The abacus could tell him how much rice he had, but it could not tell him how to create grain out of thin air. His calculations all ended in the same stark conclusion. The governor's demand of a 40% increase was impossible. To meet it, he would have to not only empty his storehouses completely, but also buy rice from other merchants at inflated prices, bankrupting himself in the process. It was not a tax. It was a punishment disguised as policy. That evening, in their small, clean home attached to the depot, his wife, Mei Xian, watched him. She saw the new lines etched around his eyes. She was a practical woman, one who understood the world through the tangible realities of running a household and raising their children. She did not need an abacus to know they were in danger. "This is not a request they have made," she said, her voice low as she mended one of young Tao's torn tunics. "This is a threat. It is the governor, Fan Zhong. Everyone knows his reputation. He uses the law like a club to beat merchants into line." "He is the governor," Wu Lian replied, staring at the wall. "The law is his to use." "And what will we do?" Mei Xian pressed, putting her needlework down. "We cannot give him what we do not have. Will we lose everything? This home? The business you built from nothing?" Wu Lian looked at his wife, at the genuine fear in her eyes, and his resolve hardened. "I will find a way," he said, more to reassure himself than her. "There is always a way." But the world had other plans. The vice was about to tighten. A few days later, the rhythmic thud of marching feet echoed from the main road. It was a sound that did not belong in their quiet town. Wu Lian and Tao went to the gate of the depot and watched as a column of soldiers approached. These were not the governor's men. Their armor was different, hardened leather plates stitched together, and their banners bore the sigil of a snarling tiger. These were the personal troops of warlord Sun Jin, the military commander of the Qi faction, a man known for his brutality and his single-minded focus on conquest. A hulking captain, his face a roadmap of old scars, dismounted and strode towards Wu Lian. He did not bother with pleasantries. "You are the rice merchant?" he grunted. Wu Lian bowed his head slightly. "I am Wu Lian. Warlord Sun Jin's army is preparing for the autumn campaign," the captain announced, his voice loud enough for everyone in the depot to hear. "The state's granaries are slow to deliver. The army requires a contribution. Your town will provide 200 sacks of your finest rice. My men will collect it now." It was not a request. It was an order, backed by the 50 armed men standing behind him. Wu Lian's heart sank. 200 sacks. It was a huge amount, a devastating blow to his already strained reserves. To refuse was unthinkable. He gave the order, and his workers, their faces grim, began loading the warlord's carts. Wu Lian watched as a significant portion of his life's work was hauled away as a contribution. The soldiers didn't even offer a receipt. He thought the worst was over for the day. He was wrong. The very next morning, a different kind of visitor arrived. This was not a brutish captain, but a single man, an emissary, dressed in fine, dark silks. He rode a well-groomed horse and carried himself with an air of sophisticated confidence. He introduced himself as a representative of Warlord Zhao Min, Sun Jin's chief rival from the neighboring state of Wei. This man was invited into Wu Lian's office. He accepted a cup of tea and smiled, a thin, knowing smile that did not reach his eyes. "Master Wu Lian," the emissary began, his voice smooth as polished jade. "My lord, the great Zhao Min, has heard of your troubles. He knows of Governor Fan Zhong's oppressive quotas. He knows of Warlord Sun Jin's crude methods of acquisition." He took a slow sip of tea. "My lord does not believe in such tactics. He believes in partnership, in mutual prosperity." Wu Lian remained silent, waiting. "Lord Zhao Min is prepared to offer you his protection," the emissary continued, placing his cup down gently. "No more surprise contributions for Sun Jin's army. No more impossible quotas from the governor. Your trade routes will be secured by our patrols. Your depot will be under the benevolent watch of our lord." It sounded too good to be true. Wu Lian knew there was a price. "And what does the benevolent Lord Zhao Min ask for in return?" The emissary's smile widened slightly. "A simple gesture of loyalty. An exclusive trade agreement. All your rice, sold only to our agents, at a price we both agree upon. You will help fuel our cause, and in return, you will become the most powerful merchant in this region, safe and prosperous under our protection." The serpent had made its offer. Wu Lian was no longer just a merchant caught by a greedy governor. He was now a pawn in a game between two warlords, a hammer on one side, a serpent on the other. That night, the small house was filled with the weight of this impossible choice. Wu Lian sat with Mei Shan, explaining the two offers. "We must choose neither," Mei Shan insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "To side with Sun Jin is to become his piggy bank. To side with Zhao Min is to make a mortal enemy of Sun Jin and the governor. We are merchants, Wu Lian, not soldiers. Our only allegiance is to this family, to our workers." Later, Wu Lian sought out Elder Shao, whom he found staring at the moon's reflection in the now dark river. He explained his dilemma. The old scholar was silent for a long time. Then he turned his gaze from the river to Wu Lian. "Economy," he whispered, his voice frail, "is the echo of choices made in fear. The governor wants you to fear the law. The warlords want you to fear their armies. They all want you to make a choice based on what you are afraid of losing. But the wise man asks a different question. He asks what choice is based on the principles he wishes to build." Wu Lian returned to his office, the old scholar's words echoing in his mind. He could not find a path forward based on fear. So he turned to what he knew. He turned to what he could control. He turned to the discipline his mother had taught him. He began to economize. He instructed his workers to be stricter with their measurements. Every spilled grain was to be collected. He reduced the amount of rice he sold to local villagers, a decision that pained him but felt necessary. He reviewed every line of his ledgers, looking for the smallest inefficiency to trim. He was preparing for a long siege. While Wu Lian focused on this defense, on cutting back, young Tao was focused on finding a new path. Unbeknownst to his master, the boy spent his nights not sleeping, but hunched over a crude map he'd drawn on a spare scroll. He was using small stones to represent carts and drawing lines between their town and 3 smaller, more isolated villages that were not on the main trade routes. These villages had other things: salt from a nearby marsh, pottery from a clay pit, hardy mountain goats. They needed rice, but were often ignored by major traders. Tao saw a new kind of economy, not a straight line to the capital, but a triangle, a small, self-sustaining network, a way to trade outside the grasp of the warlords and the governor. It was a brilliant, risky idea, born of youthful optimism. Just as Wu Lian was sinking deeper into his defensive crouch, the final piece of the political trap was laid. A new official arrived from the capital. He was not a soldier, nor a smooth-talking emissary. He was a tax collector, a man with cold eyes and an ink-stained finger. He made it clear that Governor Fan Zhang was disappointed by Wu Lian's lack of communication. "The quota is the quota," the tax collector said, his voice flat. "But the governor is a reasonable man. He understands the pressures on a small merchant." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A gift, a significant gift, paid in silver, delivered directly to the governor's provincial office, would be seen as a gesture of great respect. And in light of such respect, perhaps our accountants would not be so diligent in their review of your granaries this season." The bribe. It was laid bare, no longer hidden behind euphemisms. Pay the silver, and the problem disappears. It was the easy way out, the fastest way to escape the vice. All he had to do was become a part of the corruption he despised. Wu Lian looked at the tax collector's waiting face. In his mind, he saw the snarling tiger banner of Sun Jin. He saw the serpent smile of Zhao Min's emissary. And he saw the 10 grains of rice his mother had saved in the famine. Every path was a form of agony. The question was, which path allowed him to keep his soul? The choice between the bribe and the gambit weighed on Wu Lian for days and nights. He would lie awake on his sleeping mat, the face of the smiling, serpentine emissary on one side, the cold, dead eyes of the tax collector on the other. He could hear the clicking of his abacus in his mind, but the beads only formed patterns of loss. To bribe the governor was to feed a monster, hoping it would eat you last. To align with a warlord was to tie his family's fate to the bloody whims of ambitious generals. Both were choices of fear. Then his mother's voice would whisper to him from across the years, "This is the seed for tomorrow." While he wrestled with his conscience, the world made the decision for him. The whispers of hardship from the north turned into a desperate roar. The famine, which had been a distant threat, arrived at their doorstep. The sky remained a flat, merciless blue, day after day. The Jing River, once a proud, flowing artery of commerce, shrank to a sluggish, shallow stream, its banks widening into expanses of cracked, thirsty mud. The rice paddies surrounding the town, normally a vibrant green, turned a sickly yellow, the stalks brittle, and their heads empty of grain. The first refugees began to arrive, skeletal figures in dusty rags, carrying nothing but the hollow-eyed stare of starvation. They spoke of entire villages to the north that had been abandoned, of neighbors fighting over roots and insects. At night, if the wind was right, you could hear a faint, chaotic noise from the nearest provincial city, the sound of riots. The depot, once a symbol of prosperity, now felt like a fortress under siege. The hungry eyes of strangers followed every sack of rice that was moved, every worker who came and went. The crisis was no longer a number on a ledger. It was a tangible, breathing thing. One morning young Tao came to him, his face streaked with dust, his usual youthful energy replaced by a nervous intensity. He unrolled his crude map on Wu Lian's desk. "Master Lian," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The bribe is a ghost. You pay the silver, and what then? The famine remains. The warlords remain. We will have an empty granary, and only the word of a corrupt official to protect us. But this—" He tapped the map, the triangle he had drawn between their town and the 3 smaller villages. "This is real. The village of Anping has salt. The potters of Shangyuan have clay jars we need for storage. The herders in the western hills have goats. They are starving for grain, but they have things of value. If we feed them, we don't just save them, we create a new economy. We build a network of allies. We build our own tomorrow." Wu Lian looked at the map. He looked at the fierce hope in his apprentice's eyes. He thought of his mother saving 10 grains of rice. The bribe was eating the seed. Tao's plan. Tao's plan was an attempt to plant it in new soil. "It is a great risk, Tao," Wu Lian said softly. "Doing nothing is a greater one," the boy replied, his voice shaking but firm. In that moment, Wu Lian made his choice. He would not feed the monster of corruption. He would feed his neighbors. He chose Tao's plan. That very night, the operation began. Under the cloak of a moonless sky, Wu Lian's most trusted workers loaded 3 small carts with precious sacks of rice. They moved in silence, their footsteps muffled, the wheels of the carts wrapped in cloth to dampen the sound. It was a terrifying gamble. Every grain that left the depot was a grain he could not use to appease the governor or the warlords. It was an act of profound faith. At first, it seemed to work. 2 of the carts returned before dawn, their precious rice replaced with heavy sacks of salt and dozens of sturdy clay pots. A small victory. A flicker of hope. But the world outside the depot was lawless. On the 3rd night, one of the carts did not return on time. Hours later, the driver stumbled back into the depot, his face bruised and his arm broken. Bandits. They had been waiting in a wooded ravine and had taken everything: the cart, the mules, and every last grain of rice. The seed had been stolen. A week later, nature itself turned against them. A sudden, violent thunderstorm, unseasonal and fierce, swept through the region. It did little for the thirsty crops, but it turned the dry ravines into raging torrents. Another of their carts, this one carrying a delivery to the goat herders, was caught in a flash flood. The cart was smashed to pieces against the rocks, its axle broken, its cargo of rice a muddy ruin swept away by the brown water. The losses were catastrophic. Wu Lian's reserves dwindled to a dangerously low level. The carefully balanced equation of Tao's grain triangle was collapsing. The villages they had promised to supply were now receiving only a fraction of what they needed, and their faith in the merchant of Jing River began to sour. His own workers started to whisper, their fear palpable. Had their master gone mad? Young Tao was devastated. He locked himself in his small room, refusing to eat. He believed his youthful arrogance had doomed them all. "I was a fool," he sobbed to Mei Shan through the door. "I played a game with our lives, and I lost." Wu Lian's world was shrinking. His plan was failing. His people were losing hope. And then, the fist of the warlords tightened once more. News came, delivered by a terrified traveler from a town 2 days' journey to the east. A fellow merchant there, accused of hoarding grain and defying the army, had been made an example of by warlord Sun Jin. He had been publicly hanged in the town square, his body left to turn in the wind as a warning to others. The terror was no longer abstract. It had a face and a name and a rope. A few days later, one of Sun Jin's patrols stopped at the depot, demanding another contribution. Wu Lian, his face a mask of calm he did not feel, met them at the gate. He led the patrol sergeant through his storehouses, which now looked pitifully empty. "As you can see, Captain," Wu Lian said, his voice steady, "the famine has been hard on us all. The bandits and the floods have taken their toll. What little I have left is needed to keep our own town from starving." He was faking a shortage that was now terrifyingly close to being real. The sergeant stared at the sparse sacks, kicked one with his boot, and grunted. He could see there was little left to plunder. With a final, threatening glare, he and his men departed, leaving Wu Lian shaking, his back soaked with sweat. He had survived the encounter, but he knew they would be back. He was at the bottom of the pit. His gamble had failed. His reserves were nearly gone. His allies were losing faith, and the shadow of the warlord's noose hung over everything. He had made the moral choice, the choice of a builder. But in this broken world, it seemed that the moral choice was also the path to ruin. Desperation is a powerful asset. It can dissolve principles that were once as hard as stone. Wu Lian, having chosen the path of community and innovation, now found himself cornered by the consequences. His faith in his own plan had been shattered, and the world was closing in. It was in this moment of weakness that the serpent, warlord Zhao Min, returned. A message arrived, summoning Wu Lian not to his depot but to a neutral location, a makeshift military checkpoint on a desolate, windswept road. It was a power play, forcing the merchant to come to the warlord. Wu Lian went. He found Zhao Min's silken-robed emissary waiting for him, flanked by a dozen soldiers whose eyes were as hard and empty as river stones. They offered him no tea this time. "You were unwise, Merchant Wu," the emissary said, his voice laced with a cold pity. "You tried to walk the middle path, but the middle path has been washed away by the floods and consumed by bandits. You see now that independence is just another word for vulnerability." He gestured to the arid, empty landscape around them. "My lord's offer still stands. Protection, security, prosperity. But his patience wanes. The time for partnership is over. He now requires a commitment, an oath of loyalty, signed with your name, sealed in blood." The emissary produced a scroll and a small, sharp knife. The offer of security was no longer a business proposition. It was a demand for fealty. To sign it would be to make himself a willing instrument of war, a traitor to his own state of qi, and a man forever bound to the serpent's cause. To refuse was to stand utterly alone, having now angered all three major powers in the region. Wu Lian looked at the scroll. He looked at the knife. He thought of his family, his workers, the hungry faces in his town. The temptation to sign, to simply surrender to a powerful protector and end this nightmare, was immense. It was a physical ache in his chest. But then he thought of his name, the name his father had given him, written on ledgers that represented promises kept. To put that name on this scroll, to seal it in blood, felt like a deeper kind of death than any warlord could threaten him with. He pushed the scroll back across the rough-spun table. "I am a merchant of rice," Wu Lian said, his voice quiet but clear. "Not a courtier of war. I will not sign." He stood up, bowed his head slightly and walked away, leaving the emissary staring after him with an expression of pure, cold fury. He could feel the eyes of the soldiers on his back, a physical weight, every step of the long walk home. He had kept his integrity, but he feared he had just sealed his doom. He returned to the depot, a man hollowed out by his own principles. The small amount of silver he had earned from his barter trade was gone, paid to his workers to keep them from abandoning him. The last of the reserve grain was being rationed out in pitiful amounts. The gnawing reality was that in a few days he would have nothing left. That evening, as he sat in his office, staring at his empty inkwell, Mei Xian entered. She did not say a word. She came to his desk and placed a small, silk-wrapped parcel before him. He unwrapped it. Inside, nestled on the cloth, was her jewelry. A pair of jade earrings from her mother. A silver hairpin that was a gift from her grandmother. Her dowry. Her entire personal history. Her connection to her ancestors, lying on his desk. "Mais chien, no," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I cannot take this." She placed her hand over his. Her hand was warm, steady. "This is not for the governor or the warlords," she said, her eyes meeting his without a trace of pity, only strength. "This is for our people. It is for the rice we need to buy to see us through to the next harvest. It is for the family we have built here. You have not failed, Wu Lian. You have simply not given up. And neither will I." Her sacrifice was a profound act of faith, a single candle lit in his suffocating darkness. It gave him the strength to face the next day, but the next day brought only more sorrow. A commotion from the village drew him out to the willow tree by the river. A small crowd had gathered. Elder Shou, the old scholar, had collapsed while watching the water. Wu Lian rushed to his side, cradling the old man's head in his lap. The scholar's breath was shallow, his eyes unfocused. He looked at Wu Lian, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. "The ones who count rice," he whispered, his voice barely a breath of air, "must also learn to count silence." And then his eyes closed, and he was gone. The last voice of the old, ordered world had fallen silent. Wu Lian was left with only the echo of his final, cryptic words. Count, silence. What could it mean? He was given no time to grieve. As he carried the old scholar's body back towards the town, he was met by the governor's tax collector. The man's face was a mask of false sympathy. "A tragedy," the collector said, glancing at the deceased scholar. "These are difficult times. They test a man. They reveal his true character and his true allegiances." He walked alongside Wu Lian, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. "Governor Fan Zhong is aware of your predicament. He knows you refuse to bow to the serpent Zhao Min. This shows you are a loyal man of qi at heart." The collector smiled, a predator's smile. "And loyalty should be rewarded. The governor has a new offer for you, a final offer. You are a traitor. You understand supply lines, movements, whispers on the road. Give the governor information about Zhao Min's forces. Help us lay a trap for him. Betray the serpent to us. Do this, and your debts to the state will be erased. You will be declared a hero of the province." This was it. The absolute bottom. He was being asked not just to bribe, not just to swear a false oath, but to become a spy. A tool in their bloody game. To save himself by ensuring the slaughter of others. He felt a wave of nausea. He had lost his savings, his grain, his mentor. All he had left was his name. And now, they were asking for that too. He stumbled back to his office, the final temptation echoing in his ears. He was a man with no resources, no allies, and no hope. He did not see young Tao, who had been watching from the shadows, his face pale with horror. The boy, who had been hiding in shame for weeks, saw the utter despair on his master's face. He crept back to his small room, Elder Shou's final words turning over and over in his mind. Count silence. Count what isn't there. Hours later, as Wu Lian sat in the dark, contemplating the moral abyss before him, his door creaked open. It was Dao. The boy's eyes were red, but they burned with a new, desperate light. He was holding a scroll. "Master," Dao whispered, his voice hoarse, I think I know what Elder Shou meant." He knelt before Wu Lian's desk. "We have been trying to count the rice. But the answer isn't in the rice. The answer is in the ledger? The answer is in the silence. He unrolled the scroll. On it was a complex diagram of roots, numbers, and seals. We cannot win with the grain we have, but perhaps we can win with the grain they think we have. He looked up at his master, his guilt washed away by a flash of strategic genius. We will create a ghost, a false manifest, a decoy shipment. We will make them count the silence. It was a plan of pure deception, a lie so bold, so audacious, it might just be the only truth that could save them. Wu Lian stared at the boy, then at the scroll. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something that was not despair sparked within him. It was the faint, dangerous glow of a final, impossible gambit. The decision was made. In the flickering lamplight of his office, Wu Lian looked at young Tao, and for the first time in months, he felt not the weight of dread, but the sharp, electric thrill of a purposeful risk. He was no longer a victim reacting to the world. He was about to become an actor, shaping it with a grand deception. The silver from Mei Xian's jewelry, which could have been a bribe to appease a corrupt governor, was instead repurposed. It became the seed money for their economic coup. It paid for 2 sturdy carts, 4 strong mules, and just enough rice, about 30 sacks, to make their decoy shipment look legitimate to a passing scout. Most importantly, it paid for 2 discreet cart drivers, men who knew how to look afraid but act bravely. The plan was a whisper campaign given wheels. The 2 decoy carts were sent out on the main northern trade road, the very route that was now famously dangerous and watched by all sides. Their instructions were precise: travel during the day, look nervous, and do not move too quickly. They carried a false manifest, a masterpiece of forgery created by Tao's steady hand. It detailed a massive, fictitious shipment of 500 sacks of rice, supposedly destined for a distant garrison loyal to warlord Zhao Min, a garrison whose name Tao had plucked from an old military map. The final touch was a copy of Zhao Min's own seal, which Tao had painstakingly recreated from memory. As planned, near a strategic checkpoint controlled by Governor Fan Zhong's men, one of the drivers accidentally dropped the manifest. A gust of wind carried the scroll near the checkpoint's outer guards. The driver, appearing panicked, quickly retrieved it, but not before the guards had seen the warlord's seal. The bait was taken. The spies at the checkpoint immediately sent a runner to the governor. The news hit Governor Fan Zhong's office like a thunderclap. Wu Lian, the defiant little merchant, had not only refused to bribe him, but had fully allied himself with the enemy, Zhao Min, and he was now moving a massive supply of grain to aid the war effort. The governor, blinded by his own arrogance and greed, saw a golden opportunity. He could intercept this supply line, starve his rival's garrison, and capture Wu Lian's entire fortune in one fell swoop. He immediately diverted a significant portion of his regional forces to set up an ambush along the northern road. Meanwhile, Warlord Zhao Min's own scouts saw the flurry of activity. They saw the governor's troops mobilizing in force. Believing the manifest to be real, they could only assume that Fan Zhong was setting a massive trap for them. Panic rippled through Zhao Min's command. Was Wu Lian betraying them? Was this whole thing an elaborate ruse? Unwilling to risk his soldiers, Zhao Min ordered his forces to pull back, to abandon their forward positions and adopt a defensive posture until the situation became clear. The deception was perfect. Wu Lian's 2 enemies, each thinking they were outsmarting the other, were now effectively paralyzed, fighting shadows. The main roads were a knot of paranoia and military posturing. And in that moment, in the silence Wu Lian had created, the real work began. He gathered his most loyal workers, men who had been with him since the beginning. He divided the last of his real grain, the pittance he had left, and loaded it onto small handcarts in the backs of mules. They did not take the main roads. They took the forgotten paths from Tao's map, through dense woods, over rocky hills, and along dried-up creek beds. It was slow, grueling work. But this time, it succeeded. They reached the salt village of Anping, the pottery town of Shanyuan, and the goat herders of the western hills. They arrived not as powerful merchants, but as humble allies fulfilling a promise against all odds. The villagers, who had nearly lost hope, greeted them with tears and gratitude. A new economy, the one Tao had dreamed of, sparked to life. The rice was gone in days, but in its place, Wu Lian's depot began to fill with other kinds of wealth. Heavy, coarse sacks of salt, more valuable than silver in many parts of the kingdom. Stacks of sturdy, well-made pottery, essential for storing what little food and water people had. And a small herd of nimble goats, a source of milk and meat. He had created a diversified treasury, a wealth based not on a single commodity controlled by the state, but on the varied skills of a resilient community. Armed with this new kind of capital, Wu Lian took his final, boldest step. He sent 2 of his best men, with a cart loaded with precious salt, on a long, secret journey south towards the coast. The coast was outside the main famine region, its people less desperate, its trade routes connected to the sea. Weeks later, the men returned. They had traded the salt, not for silver, but for a massive haul of dried salted fish and sacks of millet, a hardier grain that had survived the drought better than rice. While Wu Lian was rebuilding, his enemies were collapsing. Governor Fan Zhong's costly ambush found only 2 carts, with a handful of rice, and 2 very confused drivers. His failure was so public, his misuse of military resources so blatant, that word reached the royal court. He was quietly removed from his post for incompetence, his career ruined by the ghost he had chosen to chase. Warlord Zhao Min, having pulled back his forces in fear of a trap, lost a critical battle on another front. His momentum was broken, his invasion stalled, and his forces began a long, slow retreat from the region. The serpent had been charmed by its own reflection and had lost the war. By the time a fragile peace settled over the land, the Jing River Rice Depot was once again a hub of activity. But it was different now. Wu Lian was trading in salt, fish, millet, pottery, and livestock. He used new ledgers, designed by Tao, which were based on a complex but fair system of barter and trust. He had created an economy that was stronger, more decentralized, and more resilient than the one that had existed before. He never recovered his personal fortune. The silver was gone. The grand storehouses were never quite as full of rice as they once had been. But Wu Lian was, by any measure, the richest man in the province. His wealth was the trust of his neighbors, the loyalty of his workers, and the quiet, steady hum of a community he had saved from the brink end. Years passed. The wars sputtered to a close, and a tense but lasting peace settled over the lands of Qi and Wei. The Jing River rose again, and the rice paddies were once more green and heavy with grain. One cool autumn afternoon, the entire town gathered by the willow tree at the riverbank for the funeral of Elder Shou. His passing had been marked on the day he collapsed, but this was the formal ceremony to honor his memory. Wu Lian, now a man in his mid-40s with threads of silver in his hair, stood before the crowd. He was no longer just a merchant. He was a respected town elder, a leader. He spoke not of sorrow, but of wisdom. "Elder Shou taught us," Wu Lian said, his voice calm and carrying over the quiet crowd, "that a man of principle does not fear the storm. He learns to build a stronger house. We are all now builders." He had become a teacher. His depot was still a place of trade, but his office had become a classroom. And his star pupil, young Tao, was now a thoughtful young man who had just opened the town's first school of economic stewardship. He didn't teach boys how to get rich. He taught them the lessons he and Wu Lian had learned in the crucible of the famine. He taught them from ledgers that tracked not just profit and loss, but trust and value. He taught them that the most important thing to count is not the coins in your purse, but the promises you keep. As the sun set, casting a golden light on the peaceful river, the words of the ancient sage, Confucius, seemed to hang in the air, no longer a warning, but a quiet, earned truth. He who does not economize will have to agonize. Wu Lian had economized. He had saved, he had planned, he had been disciplined. And yet he had also agonized. He had faced ruin, starvation, and the collapse of his world. The old words, he realized, were not a simple promise that discipline could prevent suffering. Suffering was inevitable. The agony was part of the journey. The true lesson was in what came after. The true wealth was the peace you built from the ashes of your agony. And so our story ends. A story of a simple merchant who, when faced with the choice between a corrupt peace and a principled struggle, chose the harder path. He learned that true economy is not just about saving grain, but about cultivating trust, and that true wealth is not a full storehouse but a peaceful night's sleep. He who does not economize will have to agonize, but those who do, they may still sleep at peace.